The process to bringing your cover into Photoshop, into the mockup, may look intimidating and difficult. It's actually quite simple. We just need to be aware of the document first that we're bringing it into. We'll look at that in a moment. What I want to mention, I'm going to go to an Illustrator file here. I want to mention again, when you're laying your book out, when you're working on it and designing it, your familiarity with Illustrator and the ease around which you can move things about is definitely helpful. I just wanted to show you here, this file it's all pieced down. This is an older file for this book. However, you'll see actually this one isn't entirely pieced down. Here's some of it. So this had previously been brought into Photoshop, and then these were added. So what was done in this case was all these items were done in Illustrator and then brought into the Photoshopped background. These were as well. And one of the ways that I do that, I'm just adding some things back in that I deleted here. One of the ways that I do that is by making a little bit of an anchor up in the corner there, just this black square. And then that is my indication from the bleed guide of this document. So you can see there's the bleed. From the bleed guide, I know that when I copy and paste, so I'm selecting the anchor and I'll shift and select the components that I want to paste in. I select them all and then I copy. And what that does is act as a reference point for where I want to place that. So if I do paste, I'm just bringing this into an existing document, so it's going to look a little messy. But I use that anchor point at the top just to set into the corner, because that anchor, that box, I know it was at the exact corner on the Illustrator document, so that makes sure that I've placed things exactly in this document. And then all I need to do from that layer is just delete that box. Okay, so again, it's very helpful to design in Illustrator or even InDesign, but eventually you're bringing it into Photoshop. I would say even with InDesign, you're getting into a little bit of complication because the copy-paste doesn't work that well the way it does between Photoshop and Illustrator. So Illustrator and Photoshop are definitely recommended for a project like this. InDesign, of course, is where we have more complicated typography and typesetting that we need to do. So that's why we have these three programs, because you find your own working style and which one you would like to use. So I'm going to get rid of this added layer there. Now, at the completion of your design, your book design, regardless of in what program you designed it, when it comes to getting it into a mock-up, ideally you get your cover into Photoshop. So for argument's sake, let's say this was designed entirely in Illustrator. I would save it out as a TIFF or a JPEG. So I would, from Illustrator, I would export as a high resolution TIFF file or JPEG and get everything into a Photoshop or a rasterized environment. So in this case, this cover was very much built in Photoshop. So what I first want to do, regardless of where I built it, I want to make sure that this is flattened, that this whole cover has been merged into a single layer. So in my layers palette, there's a few ways we can do this, of course, but I'm just going to go to the flyout menu here and I'm going to do flatten image, and it will make sure that all the layers turn into a single one. It's going to ask you, it's going to say, are you sure you want to get rid of all the layers? We'll say okay. So a little warning, if you did design your document in Photoshop, save it before you do this and don't save when you do this. Or if you are even nervous that you may accidentally save once you've flattened it. You can undo, of course, but I would say just make a copy. So you don't want to lose all of your working layers because you're just trying to make a mock-up. So I've flattened the image, so it's a single layer. Now, we always have in this kind of process a few options. I'm going to give you the easiest option, of course. I'm going to go to my select tool, and first we're going to do the front cover. So I'm going to select exactly my front cover. So you can see I'm not selecting the bleed. I'm not going out because the bleed, in this case, we're doing the mock-up. We don't need the bleed. It'll just cause a little more inaccuracy when it comes to making our mock-up. So I've just isolated the 6 by 9 inches of that front cover on this flattened background. So I can copy that, Command C or copy, and then I'll go into my mockup file. Now we do have that cover copied, but we're going to look at this for a moment. Now this mockup file is showing us a few things. We're going to go right up into the front cover here, and I'm going to open that. So the best way to get a read on what's going on in this Photoshop file, whenever you get these mockup files, there's many thousands out there that you can use, some better than others. You want to know what's going on in the file. You want to be aware of where you're to be placing your item. These files are not as automatic and easy as they sometimes appear to be. Sometimes you'll have ones that say put cover here or something. Well, you can see here, place cover here. Okay, well, place cover here, that's not automated. You have some things you have to do, some techniques, some tools you have to use in order to make sure it's accurate. So just looking through this, we have the front spine. So fortunately, they've titled the layers, and the front cover, and then the front cover base. I'm going to hide these. This is the base that's actually showing that the cover is there. You can see it's just a background. Now, the way that these items are interacting with that gray is in the layer mode. So you can see in a couple areas here. For example, if I click on front spine, the layer mode says overlay. Now if I change that to normal, you can see what's happening. You lose that darkness, that shadow. So overlay shows a bit of, it brings through some of that shadow, and normal does not. So you lose a lot of that dimension. Now let's see the layer mode in this one. It's overlay as well. And then the base, that's set to normal. Again, that's just the base indicating the book, and that base would have been given this little glow edge and so on. It's a good mock-up in terms of how the light interacts with it. And then we have the catch shadow. So a catch shadow, you'll see it right here. So that's catching the shadow that's being cast by this. So shadow is so important in mock-ups because it gives that dimension. Mock-ups are intended to show what this book is going to look like if it were actually printed and created. And then the front book shadow, you can see just that little bit down in the bottom corner there, that turned on and off. Okay, so that's our front cover. Of course, our back cover has similar features. It has its own little bit. You may not have seen it there, but it's right here. So they didn't add a specifically colored spine there, but actually it is. It's colored the same as the front cover, so that is correct. And then they have the base as well. So it is very important whenever you're working with any file like this to be aware of what's happening in the file so that you know where to place your artwork. Here we have the wall shadow. So these are outside of the front and back covers. Of course, the backdrop, and then, which the backdrop is nice because it gives it a little bit of, it warms up the image, gives it some context, and rather than just a blank white background. And then, of course, we have it's called model background, but it's essentially the white that resides under everything. And depending on the layer modes, probably doesn't even need to be there. The backdrop here is normal. It's not see-through. It has no opacity. So in this case, the model background isn't serving much of a purpose. But it's a standard background for a file like this. Okay, so I copied that cover. I copied our 6x9 area for that front cover. So I'm going to go into our front cover folder here. And I know that the mockups front cover is here. So I'm going to click on the front cover base so that when I paste my artwork in, it falls in above that. So I'll paste, and there it is. I'm going to zoom out, and we can see a few things are happening. So I pasted it in, but there's this artwork is over top, and it has overlays on it. So that's why we're seeing a little bit of that show through. Now, when I pasted mine in as well, it came in, it's probably exceeding my canvas edges. We'll deal with that in a moment. So I'm going to turn these off. These are the mock-up items, so I don't need them at the moment. And on my layer, and I'll name this layer, so it's always good to name the layer. So this is called the Great Exchange. So I'll just do TGE front. Okay, so I need to get this layer. I'm going to go back to my main cursor here, my move tool. I need to get that layer to match up with the cover dimensions. So we do have, because we're doing a mock-up, we have a little bit of flexibility. We don't want to skew anything. We don't want anything to look unrealistic. That's why we're making sure we're working with a 6x9 mock-up and our 6x9 cover art. But we do have some flexibility when it comes to maybe exceeding the edges by a couple of pixels in order to make sure that there's no show through around the edges. And I'll explain that in a moment. So I've pasted it in. I'm going to, you can see it is a little larger than our canvas, but that's okay. We're going to be scaling it down to fit. So what I like to do in this case is first I'll zoom in. So space command, click and drag to get my zoom tool. And I'm just going to align, I'm going to go right into here. I'm going to align my corners up. And I'm actually going to see, zooming out, I may see some of the edge of the book when I scale this. We're just going to see what happens. And that's okay. We have ways to fix that if there's any show through. So I'm going to go to my edit menu, transform, and distort. And the reason I'm using distort is because it allows me to move each corner of this graphic independent to the others. So it's the best one to use in this regard because it allows me to be very precise. Where the others, they will move some aspect of the graphic in relation to the other corners. So I'm going to use distort, and I'm going to align this corner up with my cover corner. I'm just being quick at the moment. I'll get more detailed in a second. Okay, so proportions are all good. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to get this as accurate as possible. And you know what I'm going to do? Because I have a white cover on a gray background, I think I'm going to just exceed it by about a pixel or two. That's not going to be noticeable because we're going to get rid of that excess. So I'll just go a little bit beyond here. And I'll do the same down at the bottom. Remember I'm using my space bar to move this around quickly. There we go. So I'm exceeding, I'll press return here and I'll just turn my opacity down. I'm exceeding that edge just a bit. You can see I'm doing it there and up along there because this mock-up actually has a curve in it, which is kind of good because it adds a little bit of realism to it. And I've exceeded the edges there. So I like how it's placed. I'll turn my opacity back up. But I don't want that edge being exceeded. So I'm going to delete that away. So I'm still selected on my artwork cover. This is my front cover artwork. And I have the front cover base down here. So I'm going to do command click on first. Now I should say that we're gonna be using part of this mock-up again here, this one that existed, just to be sure. But the first thing I'm gonna do is command click the base, so you can see that grabs it selects that base shape, and we'll see, okay, so I have some excess that I want to delete away. Very little is fine. So I'm going to go to my select menu. You can do Command Shift I, which I always do, or inverse. And what we're going to do is invert the selection, because right now it's selecting what's in here, and we're going to invert it. So I'll make sure I'm on my artwork cover, and I'm going to invert the selection. Now it has everything external of that base selected. So when I press delete now, it gets rid of that excess, because that excess was in the external selection of that cover. So I'll deselect, Command D. But now I still have a little bit that might be exceeding the edge of my spine. It doesn't look too bad. But if I want to get rid of that, if I want to be absolutely sure, I'm going to do command click on the old front cover from this mock-up. So again, command click, that gets the selection, and there is a little bit of excess there. It's so little, it's 1, maybe 2 pixels, but that's okay. I still want to grab that. So I'm going to do invert again. So I'll invert the selection, Command Shift I, and from my artwork, I'll delete, select none. Now I know I have a clean selection, a clean match to that front cover. However, the base is under there for a reason, because it's got that variance. It has a little highlight. Now I'm working with a white cover, so I'm not really going to notice that highlight much, but I'm going to see what I can do to pull some of that lighting effect out. I can play with my layer mode. So let's see, if I go to multiply, that's not going to work because multiply eliminates all the light in that layer. So I'll just see if any of these work. Probably not using a white. It's just going to be too harsh of a difference. So I'm going to stay at normal, and I'm going to pull my opacity back very slightly, just to pull through some of that gray. So you can see I pulled it back 90 to 96. So I took only 4% out of the opacity there, just to set it into the mock-up a little more. That's all. Because a white cover, you don't want it to be blaring white. You're losing some of the details in the background, but you don't want to do this either because you lose the white. It looks like a gray print. So you have to just play around and find that good spot for your opacity if this is the way you're doing it. So now let's do the spine. So we have the spine will be up here. So there's our spine. So the same thing. I'm going to go get my spine using my selection tool. and my guides to make sure I get the right space, not including any of the bleed. And I'll copy, Command C, go into my mockup, and I'm going to put I'm selected on this artwork layer on the front cover artwork, and I'll paste so that it goes in above it. Again, it's going to be a lot larger. That's okay. I'll zoom out a bit, edit, transform, distort, and then I can pull these corners down. And don't worry, as you're pulling them down, it doesn't matter if you're skewing it, because as long as you have been proportionate and correct in your sizing all along, once you land this on the mock-up correctly, nothing will be distorted. It will look correct. So I'll go down here. I'm going to make sure I'm just exceeding the edge by a little bit, because I don't want any funny looking edges when this is all done. So that's the distort option in your edit menu. So I'll bring this back up to match that. Okay, so I'm exceeding the edge a bit. Press return. So that looks pretty good. There's a little bit, no, that's fine. It was just the redraw. Sometimes you're going to see little things. It looks like there's a gap or something. You'll want to just zoom in and make sure. Okay, so now again, on this spine, we want to get rid of that excess. So I'm going to do the same process. Command click on the cover base there. You can see there's our excess along that left edge. So Command Shift I to invert the selection. So now I've selected outside of it, and we'll see when I press delete. So I should in fact name my layer here. So TGE spine, and I'll press delete. And there goes that excess. And then even though I went above, and see what's going on here. I'm not sure what's going on there, but we're going to figure it out. And I think I know what that is. Our next step will take care of that. So we're going to go to the spine, select that. There we go. And we'll do the same thing. Command Shift I, selecting the inverse, and we'll delete. Okay, so I still have a bit of something going on there, so I want to find what that is. Now, if it is my spine here, yeah, I think I know what I'm going to go back a bit before I deleted that excess. So it looks like this front cover, this base, has a little bit of an odd edge to it, or something's going on there. So it's not a big deal in a mock-up, but I just want to be sure that it's not going to end up looking funny on my artwork. So I'll Command Shift I and delete that excess and delete that. So yeah, that's a little odd. Not crazy about that. So that's something that I would want to fix up. So I'm going to turn off that excess delete for now, just to hide that. Okay, so now I want that spine. We pulled the opacity back on the front cover, but I want the spine to appear that it's gaining the lighting effects. So I'm going to go to my layer modes. See again, these are probably all going to be too dark or too light. So I'm just going to do the opacity again and back that off a little bit, just so it feels like a shadowed white, not like a gray print. So we don't have to go back too much. That's fine. Not bad. Couple things I would prefer to clean up in that, but it's not too bad. And the redraw of the computer is showing some gaps that don't actually exist there. Okay, so now I'm going to close the front cover layer. We have that back cover. We have the back cover and we have the spine again. So in this case, the spine isn't showing. However, we don't want to see that purple. So I'm just going to turn the front cover off for a moment. And I'm going to go into that back cover. And right on that artwork, I'm just going to put some white on it. Now, remember we talked about smart objects. This isn't going to let me brush onto a smart object, so I'm going to have to rasterize that artwork. And the reason I'm doing this is because I can't see the spine there, so I'm just going to clean the top, just put some white there to mimic that I have the correct spine on that back cover aspect of the mock-up. So I'll just do that. And in fact, I can even take off the overlay. Okay, so it's very minor, but at least it gets rid of the purple. And if I wanted to be very accurate about it, I'd probably make it a little more gray. I can even I'm not going to pull back the opacity actually because, well, I could because it's not on a color. So there we go. So it just gets rid of that purple top. Those little details you do want to catch when you're doing your mock-up. So I'm going to turn the front cover off again for a moment because I'm going to bring in my back cover and I want to make sure I get that correctly lined up. So again, I'll go to the base of the back cover. There it is. And I'm going to go back and get my cover art. So the page, the 6x9 of the back, no bleed, no spine, just my 6x9 face of the back cover. Copy and paste. Now remember, if you get it on the wrong layer, if it's not where you want it, of course you can drag and drop your layers. That's not a problem. But it's nice to just select the layer that you want it above, and then when you paste, it'll come in. So I'll do my TGE back. And same thing. I'm going to go to distort. So transform and distort. And then, oops. Then I'm just going to grab the corners again. If everything is correctly sized, don't worry that it's skewing for a moment because it will come in and match the corner and look fine. So I'm going to line that right up. And again, I do like to go a pixel or two out of the edge so that I know I'm not going to get any black lines from whatever may be behind it. And then I'll trim away the excess if I need to. Okay. Now I'll turn off that original cover there because it was showing through. And I will select the back cover again. So Command click on the thumbnail and Command Shift I, or select inverse. And that's going to allow me to delete anything that went outside of it. There we go. So now I'm going to turn my front cover back on because I want to see how the shadow looks, see if I still need to pull the opacity back on the back cover, which I'm going to very slightly. Just because it's in a little more shadow, I'm going a little lower than the 96 I went with the front there. There we go. Our cover's on. So you just want to remember the important thing, of course, is getting your cover designed and then ultimately getting that design into a JPEG, a high-res JPEG or TIFF. If it was fully designed in Illustrator, or if you've designed it in Photoshop and laid it out, then you want to make sure that you flatten that image using your menu here, and then selecting the area that you want, copying it, and pasting it in to the necessary layer on your mockup. Okay, so it's not complicated, but to do a proper job, there are some specific details that you want to be paying attention to as you go.